So this week we are exploring group formation together, and your book presented the following 5 guidelines for developing a group proposal. So you'll already see, if you've reviewed your group proposal assignment, that each of these components are embedded within the assignment. But I feel like your book kind of mentions them and runs past them a little quickly. So I want to use this lecture to dive a little bit deeper than your chapter did in reviewing each one of these foundations. Okay, so rationale. Let's talk a little about the concept of rationale and what it is. Rationale is essentially your ability to explain why you are doing what you're doing. You want to be able to answer the question, is there evidence to support the efficacy of this type of group? Is there evidence to support the need for this population, for this group to even exist? Are you prepared to answer questions regarding your rationale? These are really essential components to consider in your group proposal, and it's why it is the first portion of your group proposal assignment, and hopefully something you've already started diving into in the development of your proposed group idea. So let's take an example and move through that. Let's say you're interested in running a combination mindfulness-based stress reduction and college systems navigation psychoed group for freshmen, first generation college students, right? So we're going to assume maybe you work in a university setting and you are really familiar with the struggle that first generation college students face when navigating, trying to sort out all of the various systems that are within institutions, accessing resources that are available to them, and that this can result in a lot of generalized stress, in addition to just the transitional stress that college brings. So the first question you want to ask is, does this population need this intervention? So for the sake of the example, we're going to make assumptions and say that you have researched into the mental health needs of this population, and they show that prevalence rates of mental health concerns and generalized stress are higher than in the general student population. Or this is something, as in the example, as an administrator, just anecdotally. Um, so let's say that you have access to institutional data, and that suggests that this population does not seem to access university resources as frequently as the general student population, things like that. So that helps you to confirm that, yes, this population needs some support, some intervention in these areas. And then you want to be able to demonstrate that what you want to do with this population has the potential to address those needs. So again, for the sake of the example, we are going to assume that you have not been able to find any literature that references the exact group in its current form, right? You've proposed a very specific type of group, and perhaps there's no literature out there that confirms the efficacy of this type of group. So what you do now is you want to explore the evidentiary support for concepts that are related to this group. When we talk about evidence and data, it can be really helpful for you to think of your search for data as a funnel. So at the bottom of the funnel, we have the exact group you want to run. And at the top of the funnel, we would have the concepts that go into that group, right? The closer that we move to the bottom of the funnel, the closer that we find evidence supporting the development of your group, the better, right? If there was research to support that, yes, mindfulness-based stress reduction groups, combination of college systems navigation psychoed groups have been run with freshman first generation college students and produced wonderful results. That's an ideal. But again, that may not exist. And that doesn't mean that there's not still a strong rationale for your group. If we were to toss out any of these ideas that you may have to support various populations through various methods, we would never innovate. We might not be meeting the needs of these unique populations. However, we do want to make sure that our proposals are grounded in solid research and theory based on these concepts. We don't just want to toss out things that we feel good. We want to have some evidence to back it up, to ensure that we're practicing ethically. So let's say, again, in this example, that current evidence does not exist for your exact group in its current iteration, but there is evidence to support the concepts of your group, and these support your rationale. So you might be able to find, for example, at the top of your funnel, you find that first generation college students do experience high levels of stress, and you find that mindfulness-based stress reduction groups do indeed lead to stress reduction. Okay, so now in order to strengthen your rationale, you're going to want to see if you can get increasingly specific. So let's say that you find that mindfulness-based stress reduction groups have been used with college students previously, and that those have been effective. So we're getting closer to your target population. It's not first generation college students, but it is mindfulness-based stress reduction with college students. So that can build on your rationale. Now let's see if we can get even more specific. So now we're searching for whether or not college systems navigation psychoeducation has been used with first generation college students effectively. And let's say we find research to suggest that yes, in individual settings, this has been used and it's been effective. And then let's say we continue digging in the literature and we find that mindfulness-based stress reduction groups have actually been used specifically with first generation college students. So again, in using this funnel, what you see is that we move from these big picture concepts, these pieces that are related to the rationale you're trying to build, and we get increasingly specific until we can boil down to as close to the group you want to propose as you can get. So I encourage you to conceptualize this and refer back to this when you are developing your group proposal, and the rationale that you're building in this. I don't expect to see literature that confirms the exact iteration of your group, but I do expect to see literature that confirms the concepts that are connected to your group. And I want to see that you are able to tie those together to justify the development of the group that you're proposing. So to kind of synthesize this, it can be helpful to um, answer 3 sentence stems to kind of help you conceptualize uh, if you're addressing this concept. So you want to be able to sufficiently complete the sentence, my population needs, my group intervention meets these needs by, and the evidence that supports this intervention's ability to meet these needs is blank. Right? So if we can answer all 3 questions sufficiently, that is a strong support for your rationale. Okay, so let's talk about objectives. So objectives are essentially seeking to determine if you can clearly state what you want to attain and how you're going to do it. We want your objectives to be specific, measurable, attainable, happening within the time that you have allotted for them to happen in your group. So take the previous example. Your objectives would likely be to decrease stress and increase knowledge of college systems. Are these objectives measurable? Is the material that you need to cover to achieve both attainable within the time you've allotted for the group? These are all considerations that would go into formulating the objectives for your group. So again, I like sentence stems to kind of help conceptualize. So one that can help here is this group seeks to blank by blank. So this group seeks to some objective by some intervention. And then we want to clarify how progress is going to be measured, right? We'll talk a little bit more about this in the evaluation component. But as we want our objectives to be measurable, we need to know how we are going to measure the objective. So an example that I provided based on the previous group, is this group seeks to reduce generalized stress in first-generation college students by reviewing and practicing one new mindfulness-based stress reduction technique each group. Progress will be measured using score improvements on the perceived stress scale from pre to post-test, right? So that is an objective that is specific, measurable, and hopefully, if I've developed the group thoroughly, attainable within the specified time that I've outlined the group to run. Okay, practical considerations. Um, These may seem a little bit trivial or like they would require less intensive consideration than the other components of a group, but these details can truly make or break a group experience. So, number of members, meeting times, frequency, group composition, the location of the group, whether the group is open or closed. Let me give you an example of how these really influence the group. So, early in my doctoral program, I developed and co led a child parent relationship therapy group for parents at a Title I school. So, in the first iteration of the group, we held to a very manualized, standardized 10-week, 10-session child parent relationship therapy format. And we selected a time frame that was after school hours. We provided childcare, and we selected the location of our group to take place at the school. So, in our initial conceptualization, we thought that these considerations would sufficiently meet the needs of our population, but our membership turnout was very low. So we went back to the drawing board after completing that group for our second iteration, and reconsidered just the various elements of the needs that this parent population specifically had. And we modified the format to be completed in 5 weeks rather than 10 weeks. So condensed the format. And our group was hosted at the community center of a apartment complex where a large number of families from the school were living. And we also found funding to pay for childcare, yes, but also provide meals in addition, because the after school hours of our group were overlapping with dinner time. So meeting the logistical needs of our families allowed them to commit to attendance, and our group numbers were significantly higher. So again, the influence of all of these tiny little things on how your group is going to run is so significant. So in your group proposal, be sure that as you're conceptualizing these things, you're thinking of the specific needs of your population and how these considerations are going to be used to meet those needs. So when we think about things like group composition, or group size specifically, I think of the developmental needs of my group. So where in a parenting group, I would be comfortable having up to 10 adults in a parenting group. In a, let's say, child-centered play therapy group, I would never hold a group larger than 3. For that developmental level, three is a crowd. That's a large group. Ideally, a child-centered play therapy group is 2, made up of 2 students or children. So yeah, these things really influence how a group is going to unfold. If I were to try to put 4 children in a play therapy group, that would really impact the efficacy of the group. Okay, procedures. So, do the procedures of the group align with your objectives? How are you doing what you set out to do? Are these procedures appropriate given the population? Uh, is your approach informed by a manualized treatment or theoretical orientation? Does this align with your objectives and the needs of your population? Lots of different questions to consider. So, for instance, if you were hoping to lead a grief group for young adolescents, but you've mapped out procedures to engage in a manualized psychoeducational grief group that is talk therapy based, you would experience quite a conflict in the developmental needs of the population. So instead, you would want to consider an approach that was both developmentally responsive, like bibliotherapy or expressive arts, and aligned with the goals of the group. Okay, so evaluation. Evaluation is essentially seeking to answer the question, how will you know that you've done what you have set out to do? Evaluations are really important to map out clearly before a group begins to ensure that you are effectively meeting the needs of your group members and achieving the intended objectives. Pre and post tests are common methods of evaluation, and they're really wonderful, but I would never recommend you consider these to be sufficient in and of themselves. Imagine reviewing post test results and then realizing the group that you have worked really hard to develop and run had not been successful, right? And you took no other evaluative opportunity to assess that throughout the group. Formal and informal evaluations that occur throughout a group process can really help to ensure that the group is running effectively, and that if it's not running effectively, any necessary changes can be made before the group is over. So for that reason, I really like using pre, mid, and post tests in order to assess progress along the way for groups. I also am a big fan of pretty persistent informal evaluation at each group to get a sense for how the group is experiencing their time together and if they feel like they're continuing to work towards their intended objectives and growth goals. Okay, so another concept that you reviewed in your readings that I wanted to be sure to highlight was the notion of screening. So screening is really essential to ensure that your group is running effectively and also to minimize the potential for psychological harm to all group members, even those that you screen out. So for example, I am currently actively developing an online adolescent isolation support group to address social needs during COVID. When I receive referrals to this group, I screen all potential participants using two methods: a parent intake and an individual session with the child. So, in these meetings, I am assessing for current developmental level, current level of need, uh, active trauma, any active self harm or suicidal ideation, um, anything that might be most appropriately addressed in individual counseling or necessitate a higher level of care than group provides. Um, I offer to provide these services or make referrals to best fit services if children need to be screened out if they are not appropriate for group. But this ensures that the members I'm including in group will be most effectively served through group, and those who would not be effectively served through this group are connected to appropriate resources. Okay. So finally, I want to quickly review the concept of pre-group preparation, because I think the way that it's outlined can feel perhaps a little bit intimidating. In its essence, pre-group preparation is informed consent. It encompasses the informed consent process. So it seeks to ensure that group members have sufficient opportunity to be made aware of what they are about to engage in when group begins. This is absolutely something you want to take the time to do before the group starts. I know in individual counseling, informed consent can often take place as part of an individual intake, which looks really similar to an individual counseling session sometimes. So it's easy to think, oh, well, group members show up to the first group and we will all review the informed consent or engage in the informed consent process together and review expectations at that time. But by that time, group members are already together and engaged in a group dynamic. And it's difficult then for a group member to elect to bow out or potentially feel comfortable asking difficult questions about the group or sharing that the group may not align with their expectations when other group members are already present. So we want to be sure that we are doing this before members enter into the group dynamic. So we really just want to make sure that people know what they're getting into, and use any pre-group preparation, whether it's an individual meeting or an orientation, to demystify the group process, set expectations, establish group rules and procedures, really dig into what group is and what can be expected. And this also gives you the chance as a group facilitator to address any concerns individually. So I typically like to schedule individual meetings after screenings to complete the entire informed consent process before moving into the group. And I always invite potential group members to reach out to me after that meeting if between that meeting and the time of our group starting they find they have any additional questions. I don't think that there is such a thing as a group member being over informed before group starts. All right, so this week in your discussion boards, you'll be exploring the logistics of group formation related to your proposed group, the one that you've developed for your group project. You'll be giving feedback to one another on your discussion post to hopefully support you in your proposal development. You can use one of the prompts that I provided in the discussion board or reflect on any consideration related to your proposed group that came up for you in the materials this week. I'll see you on the discussion boards.